There is something happening in your financial life right now that you cannot see. It is not a bad investment. It is not a failed business. It is not even a spending problem in the way most people define it. It is something quieter than all of those things. Something that operates in the background of your daily life so silently that most people never notice it until decades have passed and the damage is already done. And the painful truth is that the very habits you believe are keeping you financially safe are the ones doing the most harm. Today, I am going to show you exactly what those habits are, where they come from, and how to stop them before they take anything more from you. Because what is being destroyed is not just your money. It is your future. It is your family's future. And it has been happening one silent decision at a time. Let me ask you something that I want you to sit with honestly for a moment. When was the last time your bank account made you feel genuinely proud? Not relieved, not temporarily okay. Genuinely proud of the direction your financial life is moving. For most people reading that question, the honest answer is uncomfortable, because most people are not moving forward financially. They are maintaining. They are surviving. They are managing. And managing feels like progress because it is exhausting enough to feel like effort. But managing is not building. And the gap between managing and building is exactly where wealth gets silently destroyed. I want to tell you about a man I knew named Bernard. Bernard was an engineer. Intelligent, disciplined, methodical in every area of his professional life. He earned a good salary for over 20 years. He was not reckless with money. He did not gamble. He did not make wild investments. He did not live extravagantly. Bernard did everything that looked responsible from the outside. And when he sat down with a financial advisor at the age of 52, he discovered something that shook him to his core. Despite 20 years of earning a solid income, despite 2 decades of doing everything that looked right, his net worth was almost identical to what it had been 10 years earlier. 20 years of work. 10 years of effectively standing still. The advisor asked Bernard a series of questions about his financial habits. And with each answer, Bernard began to see something he had never seen before. The destruction had not come from one big catastrophic mistake. It had come from dozens of small silent ones, repeated consistently over years, each one individually harmless looking, but collectively devastating. Bernard told me afterward that the most frightening thing about that conversation was not learning how much he had lost. It was realizing how long he had been losing it without knowing. This is the nature of silent wealth destruction. It does not announce itself. It does not send you a warning. It works slowly, steadily, invisibly, and by the time most people notice it, the cost is measured not just in dollars, but in years. In opportunities that passed while they were looking the other way. In the compounding that never happened, because the money that should have been growing was quietly bleeding out instead. The ancient wisdom traditions understood this pattern long before modern finance had a name for it. In Proverbs 21:20, it says, "There is precious treasure and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man swallows it up." Notice the word swallows, not steals, not loses through catastrophe, swallows slowly, silently, unconsciously. The wealth is there, and then it is simply consumed, not by an enemy from outside, but by patterns from within. So let me show you the first thing you must stop doing with your money. And I need to tell you another story to explain why this one is so much more dangerous than it looks. There was a woman in our community named Patricia. Patricia was generous, warm, deeply loved by everyone around her. She had a good heart and a good job, and she managed her money carefully in most ways. But Patricia had one habit that she had never examined. Every time she felt anxious, every time the pressure of her week built up, Every time she felt unappreciated or overwhelmed or just plain tired, Patricia would spend, not large amounts, a new item of clothing here, a home decoration there, a meal at a restaurant she did not need, an online purchase late at night when she could not sleep. Each purchase was small. Each one felt justified in the moment. Each one gave her a brief feeling of control or comfort or reward. And each one silently drained money that should have been building her future. What Patricia was doing has a name. Financial practitioners call it emotional spending. But the ancient teachers called it something that I think is more accurate. They called it eating your seed. In agricultural societies, the seed was the most sacred financial asset a family had. It was what you planted to produce next year's harvest. To eat your seed meant to consume your future in order to satisfy your present. And that is exactly what emotional spending does. It converts future wealth into present comfort. It trades your tomorrow for a momentary feeling of okayness today. The Talmud in Tractate Soda teaches that a person should always be careful with the small things, because it is through the accumulation of small things that great outcomes are built or destroyed. Patricia did not have a spending problem in the dramatic sense. She had an awareness problem. She had never connected the emotional trigger to the financial behavior. She had never seen the pattern clearly enough to interrupt it. When I sat with her and we mapped out her emotional spending over 3 months, she was stunned. The numbers were not catastrophic individually, but added together they represented almost $400 a month that had been silently disappearing for years. $400 a month for 10 years is $48,000. $48,000 that could have been invested, compounded, grown into something that changed her retirement completely. That is what silence costs. Here is what you need to do about this starting today. For the next 30 days, I want you to keep what I call an emotional spending journal. Every single time you spend money on something that was not planned, you write down 3 things. What you bought, how you were feeling in the moment before you bought it, and whether the purchase actually made you feel better an hour later. Just write it down. Do not judge yourself. Do not punish yourself. Just observe, because awareness is the first act of financial change. And what you will discover in those 30 days will tell you more about your real relationship with money than any budget spreadsheet ever could. Now, let me show you the second thing that silently destroys wealth. And this one is going to surprise you because most financial advice actually encourages it. The second thing you must stop doing is postponing investment until you feel ready. I know how that sounds. I know every rational part of you wants to say, of course, you should wait until you have enough money before you start investing. Of course, you should get your finances in order first. Of course, you should wait for the right moment. But here is the devastating truth about waiting for the right moment. It never comes. And while you are waiting for it, the most powerful force in all of finance is working against you instead of for you. That force is time. And the loss of it cannot be recovered no matter how much money you eventually accumulate. There was a young man I mentored years ago named James. James was 26 years old, working his first real job, earning a modest salary, and carrying some student debt. Every time the subject of investing came up, James had a version of the same answer. Not yet. First, he needed to pay off the debt. Then he needed to build his emergency fund. Then he needed to feel more financially stable. Then he needed to understand investing better before he started. One not yet became 5 years of not yet. By the time James was 31 and finally began investing, he had lost 5 years of compounding on whatever he had invested. Now here is what that actually means in numbers. If James had invested just $100 a month, starting at 26 with an average return of 7%, by the time he was 65, he would have had over $260,000 from that $100 a month. By waiting until 31, he reduced that number by nearly $50,000. $50,000 lost not through any bad decision, but through the simple act of waiting to feel ready. The Talmud in Tractate Avodah Zarah says, "Do not say I will learn when I have free time, lest you never have free time." The rabbis understood that the right moment is almost always right now, imperfect as right now may be. Starting small is infinitely more powerful than waiting large. The question is never whether you have enough to start. The question is only whether you are willing to start with what you have. So here is what you need to do. This week, not next month. Not when your debt is paid. Not when you understand everything. This week you open an investment account, even if you can only put $10 in it to begin with. $10 is not about the money. $10 is about the identity shift. The moment you become someone who invests, even in the smallest way, you begin to think differently about every financial decision you make. You begin to see money as something that can grow rather than something that simply passes through you. That shift in identity is worth more than any specific amount of money. Now let me walk you through the third thing that silently destroys more wealth than almost anything else. And this one is the most personal of all. The third thing you must stop doing is making financial decisions alone without community, without wisdom, without accountability. We live in a culture that glorifies financial independence in a way that has become genuinely harmful. We celebrate the person who figures it all out by themselves. We admire the self-made success story, and we quietly shame people who admit they need guidance or that they have made mistakes. But this culture of financial isolation is costing ordinary people an enormous amount of money every single year. Because the most expensive financial decisions you will ever make are the ones you made in private, without anyone to challenge your thinking, to ask the uncomfortable questions, to offer a perspective you had not considered. I think about Bernard again here, because part of what allowed his silent wealth destruction to continue for 20 years was that he never talked about money with anyone. He considered his finances deeply private. He never discussed them with friends. He never sought out mentors who had built what he wanted to build. He never made himself accountable to anyone for the financial goals he had set in his own mind. And so his blind spots remained blind. His bad habits remained unchallenged. His mistakes went uncorrected for 2 decades because there was no one in his life who was close enough to his financial reality to notice what was going wrong. In Proverbs 11:14 it says, "Where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in abundance of counselors there is safety." This is not just a spiritual teaching. It is a practical financial principle backed by everything we know about human psychology and decision-making. We are not objective about our own finances. We cannot be. We are too emotionally involved, too attached to our habits and our identities and our fears. We need other eyes. We need other voices. We need people who care enough about us to tell us the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable. Here is what you need to do about this. I want you to identify one person in your life whose financial wisdom you genuinely respect. Not the richest person you know necessarily, the wisest. Someone who has built steadily and honestly, and whose relationship with money reflects the kind of values you want to embody. And I want you to ask that person if they would be willing to meet with you once a month and look at your financial decisions together, not to judge you, not to manage your money, simply to be a second set of eyes, a voice of accountability. someone who can see what you cannot see because they are standing outside your blind spots. This one relationship, this one act of financial vulnerability, can save you from more silent destruction than any investment strategy or budgeting system ever invented. Now let me bring all of this together, because when you see how these three silent destroyers connect, the picture becomes both sobering and genuinely hopeful. Emotional spending quietly converts your future into temporary comfort. Postponed investment quietly steals the compounding that was supposed to build your wealth over time. Financial isolation quietly allows your blind spots, your bad habits, and your fears to operate without challenge or correction. All three of these work silently. All three of them look harmless in any single instance. And all three of them are reversible starting today. That is the hope. Everything I have described to you is a pattern, and patterns can be changed. Not perfectly, not overnight, but consistently, with intention, with honesty, and with the kind of courage it takes to look at your financial life clearly and decide that silence is no longer acceptable. The ancient wisdom traditions did not produce generational wealth by accident. They produced it by building cultures in which financial habits were examined, financial wisdom was shared across generations, and financial isolation was considered not independence but foolishness. In Pirkei Avot chapter 2 it says, "Do not trust in yourself until the day of your death." At first that sounds like a warning against confidence, but the deeper meaning is this: never stop examining yourself. Never assume your habits are correct simply because they are familiar. Never stop being willing to ask whether what you are doing is actually working. That is the posture that protects wealth across generations. Not arrogance, not assumption, continuous honest examination. I want to close with a story about a woman named Eleanor. Eleanor was 63 years old when I met her. She had spent most of her working life in the patterns I have described to you today. Emotional spending she had never examined, investment she had always postponed, financial decisions she had always made alone. At 63, Eleanor had less than most people would consider adequate for retirement, and she was frightened, not panic-stricken. Frightened in the quiet way that comes when you realize time is shorter than you thought. But Eleanor did something remarkable. Instead of giving in to that fear, she let it make her honest. She did the emotional spending journal, and it changed how she saw herself. She opened a small investment account and contributed to it every single month without missing once. She found a woman in her church whose financial wisdom she respected, and she asked for monthly accountability conversations. And over the next 7 years, Eleanor did not just stop the silent destruction. She reversed enough of it to retire at 70, with more peace and more security than she had ever imagined possible at 63. Eleanor used to say something I will never forget. She would say the best time to stop the bleeding was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. You are watching this video right now for a reason. Something in you is ready to stop the silence. Something in you already knows that the patterns you have been living with are costing you more than you have been willing to admit. And now you know exactly what those patterns are and exactly what to do about them. So, I want you to do 2 things before you close this video. First, write in the comments below the words, "I am stopping the silence." When you write those words, you are making a declaration to yourself that you are done letting your wealth be quietly destroyed by patterns you never chose consciously. Second, share this video with one person in your life who you know is working hard and still wondering why the numbers never seem to add up. Because sometimes the most life-changing gift you can give someone is not money. It is the clarity to finally see what has been taking theirs. There is a verse in Psalms 34:7-10 that says, "Those who seek the Lord lack no good thing." The God who designed the principles of rest and release and generosity, the God who encoded wisdom about money into the oldest texts in human history, that God sees exactly where you are right now. He sees the years of silent struggle. He sees the effort that has not yet produced what you believed it would. And He is offering you something better than a financial strategy. He is offering you a new way of seeing. Because when you see clearly, you act differently. And when you act differently, everything changes. Stop the silence. Start today. And watch what your financial life becomes when you finally stop doing the things that were quietly destroying it all along.